Hey, men are good, as are you. And I've got something that's going to start new here, and I want you to be a part of it. Let me explain. I read almost every comment in the for all the videos, and some of them I respond to, and most of them I don't because I just don't have the time. But man, some of those comments are excellent. Some of those comments show a lot of insight into what's going on, a lot of experiences that probably should be shared around. And I was thinking about it, and I think, you know what? I'd like to start doing more videos with people in this community and talking about your experience and what's going on. So, with that in mind, if you are interested, go to the community section of this channel and let me know what you think. Let me know if you've got an idea. I'm looking for two or three, or maybe four MGTOW guys who want to tell their story and have a group of MGTOWs and talk about that. And I'd love to have also a group of men who've been falsely accused and have a talk about that and get your stories out there because man, we really need to do that. Janice Fiamengo has got me excited, about getting men's stories out there because that's exactly what we need to do. So if you want to be a part of this, go to the community section, or you could direct message me on Twitter at trgolden and let me know what you think. And let's go. Now we've already done one. I did this one a while back, and with a guy named Dave who was from this community, and it's a one about men and shame. So here we go with that one, and let me know about the other ones you might be a part of. Men are good, man. We'll see. Men and Shame in the 21st Century, an informal conversation with Dave.
Have you seen those the clips of Jordan Peterson's interview with Vice?
Oh, I've seen a lot of Peterson interviews, but I probably have missed that one. What did he say?
It wasn't necessarily anything that he said, but if you go on YouTube and you look up Jordan Peterson Vice interview, there's a video that plays the original recording directly alongside or above the Vice version that they released. And it's fantastic. It's well worth watching because it's incredible how dishonest they were in the way in which they edited that.
Wow.
And he was unbelievably fortunate that somebody leaked the original video. I mean, not that one interview could have been rock solid evidence against him because people are going to assume that there's unfair editing at some level. But to have it so clearly demonstrated.
Oh, I got to see video.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it's like 20, 25, 30 minutes, something like that.
Thanks very much for pointing that out. I can't wait to see that crap. Because that's what they do, man. That is what they do. And it's been done to men's activists for years.
Oh, I know. Yeah, things that are just cherry-picked and taken out of context.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And, of course, gynocentrism is behind a lot of that crap, eh?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's actually one of the primary things that I wanted to talk to you about. And I touched on it in our email was the shame element. Because throughout most of human history, shame was something that was used to control everybody. I mean, to some extent or another. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing across the board. I mean, there's a healthy level of shame. I mean, you should be ashamed of some things.
Yes.
You can't just walk around, spitting in people's faces and stealing their stuff and expect not to be shamed for it. But it's also,
unless you're a feminist.
Yeah, exactly. But it's something that throughout most of human history was primarily a female mechanism, used by the groups of women who formed, what was really the core of most tribal societies, and then those that grew out of tribal societies as well.
A la white feather.
What was that?
A la
yes,
white
the white feather society there in the First World War.
Yes.
It's a perfect example of that mechanism that originated on a small scale and could only be used against people who knew each other. And then you take that same thing and you blow it up on a national or international scale, like in World War I, and you have instances of men who just got back from the front lines and are in a theater trying to get away from all the images in their head, and a woman walks up to them and hands them a white feather, and then they go and kill themselves. Like that was there's an actual example, more than one,
right.
Documented cases where men who were given white feathers committed suicide because the shame was so great.
Yes.
To be branded in that way after having done your part. And there's no way that you can tell more than a few people your side of the story and have them believe it, and at least at that time, because there was you couldn't go on Twitter and say, hey, this is how I was maligned unfairly. Were just, that was how it was. And it's one of those things where I think it's an example of the poison is in the dose to an extent. By that, I mean, on a small scale, that type of shaming could be valuable to the survival of a tribe. Because if you have, let's say you have a group of, 150, 250 people that are living together in a tribal society, and one of those men who's responsible for, the care and feeding of that group behaves in a shameful or cowardly way, and then he's called out for it, that's going to reinforce, the norms that are necessary for the survival of the group. It may not be fair, and it may not have been, something that was, in fact, I can pretty much guarantee that it was not always applied fairly, appropriately, but it worked for the 250,000 odd years that mankind was developing.
It got us where we are today.
But what has it accomplished today, other than in the vast, vast majority of cases, shaming an individual man in a way that has no beneficial outcome and essentially only serves to control the individual and the group that he's associated with? Because to be associated with a man who has been publicly shamed becomes a mechanism or a weapon in and of itself. I mean, I'm sure you've seen examples of that. You cited men's rights activists.
Yeah.
You could have a guy who is a legitimate, conscientious, caring, lovable guy who all of his concerns about men's rights are 100% valid. He's conscientious to a fault, never says anything that could get him in trouble, but he's then associated with another, perhaps even just a so-called men's rights activist who says things that are, perhaps genuinely abhorrent, but he's labeled as a men's rights activist. And then this man who's self-identified as a men's rights activist is then just grouped in with him. And it basically comes down to that. You may have, touching back on Jordan Peterson again, there was a great video where he was talking about how the school administrators or teachers who were involved in that Lindsay Shepherd case said that it could have been a video, or it was like showing a video of Hitler or Milo Yiannopoulos. two guys who probably couldn't be much more different, but they're grouped under the same, hate heading, and therefore you can draw equivalencies where there are none in reality. But, and again, like I don't mean to say that I think that, in the past, the good old days, it was necessarily a good thing that men were shamed for them. I do think that there is a benefit on a broad scale that can't just be brushed aside in our past. Like, you have to look at the good and the bad that came out of it. I just can't see where today that's being applied on this larger scale in a productive way. It may still be done in a productive manner in small, tight-knit communities. Like you see that perhaps in a religious community, or just a large, closely knit family where you might have the beneficial side of that. But I don't think we see much of it today, because there aren't any of those communities left.
What you seem to be saying is that the evolutionary value of shaming had a certain degree of reality a long time ago.
Yep.
But in today's world, there's no evolutionary value to shaming.
No.
And yet it's practiced regularly. You
Yep.
know, it's a feminist tool that's used to silence men.
Yeah.
That's an interesting theory, I think.
Yeah, I think it's I think it goes beyond the bounds of feminism as well. I think it's still used. You hear the term, or at least I have. You hear the term tradcon, traditional conservative,
right,
trotted out pretty frequently as a group of people that use shame to attempt to control men that break off from the norm.
right.
And these are people who might not only not identify as feminists, but as anti-feminists, virulently so. And yet they're using the same tactics to reach a similar end while disavowing the ideology that lies behind that.
Yes.
Which I think is perhaps not intentional, but on at least the subconscious level is very crafty.
And it's automatic, I think.
Yeah.
Something that's just built in. And that's what I'd like to ask you about. Do you see any kind of physiological markers that are connected to this kind of thing?
Well, and that's something that I've done a fair bit of research on and haven't been able to find published studies that draw, a clear line between, here's the gene for shaming and the behavior for it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that, like with most behaviors, finding a specific genetic component to that would be essentially impossible with the technology that we have, because I think it's probably, like most things, kind of a soup of genetics and culture and the long evolutionary psychological history of mankind.
Yes.
But I do think that one of the other things that we talked about briefly or touched on briefly in our emails, that I had mentioned regarding the concept of memes and genes. And I don't know if you had a chance to look. I might not have remembered to send you the video or the podcast, but not to continually invoke Dr. Peterson, but it happened to be.
Oh no, it's okay. Peterson is he's an interesting character.
Yes, he's certainly a wealth of information,
and he's unafraid to say what he thinks. Bless his heart.
Yeah,
like him or not, you got to admire him for that.
Yeah, and I don't agree with 100% of what he says, but I do find that even when I don't agree, it prompts me to think about a question that I might not have approached from that angle before.
Yes,
which I find to be valuable.
Yes.
And he was talking to a woman on a podcast. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but it was a podcast with a British host. The Big Conversation, I think it's called. I'm pretty sure that was it. And they were talking about finding meaning without God. And this particular point did touch on that, but it wasn't really the focus of the conversation, but it's the thing that caught my attention most. And it's where they were talking about how Dawkins' idea of the meme, these ideas that become so widespread and so deeply rooted that they're a part of the society, the people, the culture. Yeah. And then he was talking about the bridge from that to genetics. Essentially the idea that if a meme, an idea, a thought, becomes so deeply ingrained that it shapes the, particularly the sexual selection of human beings, then there's a point at which those two cross over, and that idea has become a part of biology, essentially.
Right, our physiology. Yes,
yeah, not necessarily that it's something that, every human being grown up in a vacuum would have that idea, but that it has shaped society so much that you really can't parse them out. And they're so deeply ingrained that the idea that, a couple generations of social conditioning would just erase at least 250,000. I say 250,000 years because that's an estimate, one of the estimates for how long modern man has been around. But obviously that the roots of that would go even further back. Any kind of social ties would have started before we were recognizable as what we are today.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where, given that societies like human beings, chimpanzees, bonobos, they all have these recognizable social hierarchies and methods by which members are ostracized and methods by which members rise to the top of their social circle that aren't just, beating the hell out of each other.
Right.
It extends into, taking care of one another and the way that they're perceived by their bandmates and so forth.
And taking care of the tribe.
Yeah, exactly. Taking care of the tribe on an individual and then on a broad scale.
Yes. There's some fascinating research on the fact that it used to be long ago in the hunter-gatherer days that the men who had killed someone who was an intruder into their tribe were much more likely to marry and procreate than the men who had not.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because they're reinforcing this idea that you're protecting the tribe.
Yeah, and you've literally demonstrated that.
And so,
no question about it.
Murderers were thought of highly. And some are thinking this is why all these women sometimes will fall in love with these killers.
Oh yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought of it from that angle, but it does make sense, at least on a thought-provoking level.
Yeah,
it's rare to find somebody on death row that doesn't have suitors.
Right, exactly.
That's odd, to say the least, at least from our.
But it's highly valued to protect the tribe, and I think that is a part of what you're talking about.
Yeah, a willingness to do violence.
Yes,
and that's the thing. I think that's a clear indicator of how our hindbrain isn't capable of differentiating between. It's not capable of contextualizing things like violence. So just as an example, I was thinking about it's funny that you brought that up because I was thinking about this the other night, is that murder in and of itself, just the act of killing something or someone,
right,
is amoral because it's entirely about the context in which it is done. If you kill somebody while they're trying to kill your child, no one is going to castigate you for that and say, oh, you horrible, amoral, or immoral person.
Right.
Whereas if you kill a child, there's no question in anybody's mind, so maybe, Peter Singer, that there's a wrong being done. There's no question in anybody's mind that those two are not the same thing. But at the same time, that's your mind, your what would you call that? Like the Freudian ego, the actual conscious level, you're able to recognize those things. And obviously, an extreme circumstance like that probably also speaks to the subconscious. You have an immediate visceral reaction to something like that. Whereas a murder that you're completely disconnected from, a killing that you're completely disconnected from, that you have no attachment to either party, I imagine that visceral reaction isn't really there, or at least not to the same extent. Whereas, behind the scenes, especially in the case of someone who perhaps, like you're suggesting, is somewhat hardwired to be, to have a predilection for men with a capacity for violence, they may very well be attracted to that person and have no idea why. And again, I mean, that's purely, a hypothesis. There's nothing to, we're just talking about that. So I don't want anybody to think that, I don't think women are hardwired to be falling all over themselves because they saw somebody, murder someone.
Oh, come on, Dave.
But there is.
Of course they are.
Of course they are. Yeah.
We're both teasing, just to clarify.
Mostly. No, but I mean, I think that there's a lot of merit to the line of thinking that you're introducing, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And vice versa. I interrupted you in some ways.